Welcome to Zoom In, Zoom Out. I'm your host, Alan Liu. The Indo-Pacific security is undergoing rapid changes, with countries across the first island chain deepening security cooperation and boosting defense spending, including Taiwan. Joining me today is Charles Flynn, a former commanding general of U.S. Army Pacific. Welcome to the show, General Flynn.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks for having me. I appreciate you taking time to sit down and talk about these important issues.
General Flynn, you previously served as the commanding general of the U.S. Army Pacific. Looking at the Indo-Pacific over the past few years, do you think the region in general is becoming more tense military-wise?
I don't know if I would consider it tense. I think what I would say is that each of the countries here, to include the United States, are reacting to what I've described as the incremental, insidious, and irresponsible behavior of the Communist Chinese Party. Not the Chinese people, but the Communist Chinese Party and its leadership. So to your question, is it getting more tense? I would say that the region is responding and reacting because of the irresponsible actions by the Communist Chinese Party in the region. So that's what I think is actually happening here.
So we've seen growing military cooperation across the first island chain, right? For example, we've seen more active participation from Japan in this year's Balikatan. And the U.S. has also just deployed new Typhoon missile systems in Japan. How do you view these developments, and are they aimed at deterring any specific threats?
Well, first of all, I would say the growing relationships and the strengthening of the interoperability between, and the ones you just mentioned, Japan, the Philippines, Korea, Australia, and other countries in the region, is reflective of, again, the response that these nations are having to the irresponsible behaviors of the Communist Chinese Party. I'm glad you brought up the Japanese participation in Balikatan. That has long been a goal of the United States, of Japan, and the Philippines. And in recent years, they've signed agreements for the Japanese to be able to participate there. So again, these demonstrations or rehearsals, as they've been called by the military leaders in the region, are important because the nations have to come together under these exercise umbrellas for us to be able to bring capabilities together with organizations and new technologies and rehearse, practice, and train together on the things that create a security architecture that can deter aggression and deter, hopefully, a war here.
So during your time at U.S. Army Pacific, you emphasized the importance of land power in a maritime-focused Indo-Pacific. Why do you believe land forces remain critical to the region?
First of all, I'm going to talk about a big myth that happens out here, and it's across this region, is the security architecture in the Indo-Pacific is one that's represented strongly by land forces out here and the land power network that exists here. For many people that don't realize this, but about 80% of the Taiwan military is its army. 70% of the Philippine military is its army. In fact, the Philippines has more divisions in the Philippine military than the U.S. Army does. Japan is 65% army. India is 80% army. Indonesia is 75% army. The point I'm making here is a lot of times that people can look at the map and see a lot of ocean and a lot of air, but the region is really defined by its borders, its people, its territorial integrity, and it's also defined by the large armies that exist out here. Now, I'm going to go on a little bit here, Alan, to say that this is why the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Air Force are so important out here in the Indo-Pacific. Why? Because they keep the global commons open. They keep them functioning. They keep them secure. They keep freedom of passage available. And so I'm not saying that the Army should be the dominant player out here. What I'm saying is it takes the entirety of the joint force. And oftentimes, I think people look at the map and think this is going to be solved by air and naval power, and it's not. It's going to be solved by all-domain, joint, and multinational forces coming together in a combined and coalition national environment, training together and creating interoperability to solve these really, really challenging security problems.
I want to talk a little more about Taiwan's role in the Indo-Pacific security cooperation. You have once said countries in the region should find creative ways to include Taiwan in joint military exercises or overseas training program. We know Balicatum just wrapped up and REAMPAC is coming up. What could that look like in practice? Can you elaborate more on the details?
I think that it's time to consider what Taiwan can do in the region to improve its interoperability, and maybe more importantly is to understand its role in the region with particularly its neighbors. One of the challenges of any military that can't leave its home location, its nation, and go train with other forces is it has a difficult time gauging what it's doing well and what it's not doing so well. And one of the limitations I think that has occurred with the Taiwan military is that it's really been limited in its ability to deploy elsewhere and train. In other words, when you see other forces, you begin to get a sense for, well, what are the things that we're doing really well and what are the things that we're not doing really well? Maybe I'll just add a story here from my experiences. I recall taking a corps commander in one of the ASEAN countries to a command post during an exercise. And we had a lot of American command and control, full motion video, UAVs and intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance activities going on. And I was feeling pretty proud about what I was showing this 3-star general. And we came out of the command post, and I said, "General, what did you think about that?" And he looked over his shoulder and he looked back at the command post that we had just left, and he said, "We're never going to be like that." And I was feeling a little bit deflated at the time. But he said, "But that's not why you need us." And I turned to him, I looked at him, and he pointed, and we were walking over to visit their jungle school. And he said, "That's why you need us." And it was, I tell that story because it was a humbling moment for me, as a U.S. general thinking like, hey, we bring a lot to the region. Well, we do bring a lot to the region, but the region also brings a lot to us. And for us, and so I tell that story to highlight the fact that as the Taiwanese military matures, it may consider that deploying to other exercises in the region is something that they might want to think about, because it would enhance and improve their understanding of the security situation and the understanding of what the other militaries in the region bring.
Since we're talking about Taiwan, I want to talk about the current Trump administration's cooperation with Taiwan's in terms of security and military. Do you think Taiwan's defense is still important to the U.S.?
Of course, I think it's still important to the U.S. Let me state that there has been no change to U.S. policy. It still, abides by the Taiwan Relations Act. I think what's most important is that you see a regional war going on in Europe. We see a regional war going on in the Middle East. The last thing that we can afford is another regional war out here. And I believe that what the United States in December of 25 approved a $11.1 billion arms sale under the Trump administration. There's another $8 billion arms sale that's being moved. There's almost $20 billion of U.S. Taiwan arms sales that are in the queue right now. The other fact is you look at what the Taiwan leadership under President Lai has invested into their military, and I've seen this. I've seen the benefits of this firsthand over the last 5 years. I think they are at 3.5% GDP going to 5% by 2030. But that's really kind of not the entire story. The other part of the story is the first responders in Taiwan also have a couple of percent of their GDP. So I would make an argument that Taiwan is already in the 5 to 6% of its GDP on security, the security apparatus, both the military and the first responders. So that's the good news. The other thing that I would point out here is that sales are one thing, and being able to deliver equipment is part of that. But the most important part, Alan, is training, is preparing and training the leaders and the units to use the very things that are being provided and built by the Taiwan commercial sector to support its military.
Last year, you came to Taiwan to observe the Kuang military exercises. What were your main takeaways?
So let me make a couple of observations. First of all, last year, what I witnessed last year was a renewed demonstration of the physical movement mobilizing forces, not just the active forces, but also the reserve forces, but the visible demonstration of Patriot launchers and radars moving into very public positions, units moving through mass transit systems to be able to get from one side of the city to the other. And then even this year, I went down outside of Tainan, and there was we went out into a village in the interior, and there was a civil defense battalion out there working with the local authorities on a disturbance that had happened out there. I can tell you from looking back when I went into command in 2021, but even further back when I was a 2-star commander out here, it is a night and day difference between what the Taiwan military was doing 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, compared to today. And again, all the credit goes to former President Tsai, current President Lai, but also the relationship between the Taiwan military and the U.S. military to kind of put our shoulder into this work and to find creative ways to create rigorous and demanding training. And that's an important part of their readiness and preparedness. And again, I think that that is far more important than the sale of anything or things to Taiwan. The most important thing that the leaders and the military can work on is their level of preparedness and the individual small unit collective training that these units have to go through.
Based on your observations so far, where do you see the biggest gaps between Taiwan's current defense policies and what could actually be required in a real conflict scenario?
I think that it's time to consider potentially, and again, these are all, these are things that the current administrations, as we sort of modernize and upgrade or think through what this should look like, not just today, but into the future. I think Taiwan leaders and some of their units would be well served to be exposed to other exercises and other training that's going on in the region. Even if you're just sending a small cell to an exercise, there's a lot to be gained from that.
Thank you for your insight, General Flynn.
Yeah, thanks for having me today.
This has been Zoom In, Zoom Out. For more stories like this, visit the TaiwanPlus website or follow us on our social media. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.